Thanks for the crew. But hey, we're here for you, right? So, without further ado, I'm going to stop talking because I talk too much anyways. Ladies and gentlemen, Motive.
Mic's working, yeah? Awesome. Thank you everyone for coming. Big thanks to Pixelogic for having us. Really appreciate it. Yeah. So I'm Vince Rizzi, and these are my colleagues, Pierre-Olivier Lévesque and Patrick Anderson. And we are character artists at EA Motive in Montreal. And today we'd like to share what we've been working on for the past year and a half.
Yeah, so like Vince says, we're the character art team. I just want to give a little shout out to Arnaud and Lauren, who unfortunately are not with us today, but Arnaud is our lead and Lauren's a character artist who joined us on the project, so they are two very good artists. Go check out their work. So yeah, first of all, I just want to give a quick introduction to the studio, because most of you might not know the studio yet. It was created like almost 3 years ago. Back in 2015, it was founded by Jade Raymond. Jade Raymond is a very known person in the video game industry. She's like one of the most influential game developer in Canada, and she's now head of 3 studios at EA. She's now the head of all Star Wars franchise for HD Games, and she's very known for bringing new franchise to life, and also she's very known for bringing new mechanics and gameplay to action, adventure, and online games. So back in 2015, she had to create a brand new studio from ground up. So that's what the studio looked like a year after it was founded. As you can see, there was like about 60 employees. I was a very small, and that's a picture of the studio taken a year after. So the studio had to do a very quick ramp up. So yeah, that was kind of a challenge. And as you can,
Star Wars as your first project.
Yeah.
It's not too stressful.
Yeah, and as you can understand, there was a lot of people, so EA brought us, there was not enough places for the studio, so EA brought us a brand new studio to host all those employees. So it's a brand new studio. It was designed with awesome designer. It's very slick. It's a very creative and friendly environment to work in. So yeah, it's kind of a plus for us. So, as Vince says, we worked on Star Wars Battlefront 2. DICE is the one who did the first Battlefront. They did all the game. And us, we had to come in to do the single-player campaign. And there's also Criterion, who worked mostly on the space battles. So, yeah, so we had basically to start a studio from scratch, to ramp up to more than hundreds of employees, to branch in with DICE to work on a single-player campaign, which was one of the most wanted feature of the first Battlefront. So, like Vince said, there was absolutely no pressure. It was like a very casual thing to work on. No, seriously, it was kind of a challenge for us, but I think that the team did a very nice work on this. It's like the game is really fun, and I think it's going to be looking awesome too. And I really hope you guys are going to enjoy the game. So without further ado, we're just going to show you the second trailer that was shown. We see a little bit of the campaign stuff. And also I just want to say that the game is not released yet. It's going to be released the 17th of November.
November 17th.
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff that is still really highly confidential that we won't be able to show you today. But there's some really cool stuff that we'll be able to show you today. And after, Vince's going to show us the Eden Virtue, which is the main character of the game. Did a really awesome job on the modeling. So, yeah, let's watch it.
I've waited 30 years for this. I still remember my last orders. The day the real war began.
The rebellion cannot be allowed to persist. We weren't expecting special forces.
That's the point, Sergeant.
Impossible.
Commander, what do we do now?
We avenge our Emperor.
Resistance. Rebellion. You will burn these ideas away.
Hope cannot save them!
So, for the sake of this presentation, I'll be focusing on Inferno Squad. I'll be using some of their assets that we created as an example of how we use ZBrush. So a little background on these guys. They're special forces created by the Empire in the aftermath of the first Death Star blowing up on the Battle of Yavin. You guys should all know that. And in Battlefront 2, you'll be playing as their leader, INFERNO. So, like I said, we'll be focusing on as much as we can without spoiling anything for you guys. The game is still about a month away from release, so we'll be showing mainly content that you've seen already in trailers or maybe certain screenshots. So for this project, we worked very closely with Lucasfilm, and in particular, the Lucasfilm Story Group. The Lucasfilm Story Group, for those who don't know, it was created in 2012 with the purpose of just making sure all aspects of Star Wars stays well aligned on all the different platforms. So that would be like TV, film, comics, toys, all that stuff. They make sure that anything from storylines to even weapons, planets, they make sure all that stuff stays very cohesive and well aligned and authentic in the Star Wars universe. So we were fortunate to be given access to the Lucasfilm archives. Some of us, including Patrick, were very lucky to actually go to the Skywalker Ranch.
It was awesome.
Yeah,
It was awesome.
yeah, it's okay. So all the original props, costumes, masks, we had access to all that stuff. We also worked with ILM. We had some of their 3D models that were given to us. We used those as a reference sometimes. And we also had some scan data of some of these props. And so that brings us to the main process that we used a lot on this project, which is photogrammetry. Photogrammetry is it's a process. You take a bunch of pictures of a model, usually in a 360 manner, not always. That you then feed those pictures into a software, and it'll compile them and shoot out a 3D model. Which then you could do like whatever you want. You could use it as a reference. You could 3D print it, or depending how clean it is. So I'll very briefly show you what our process was like of taking scan data and using ZBrush, how we achieved in getting a model that we could use in our game. So if you look at the top left corner, that's the original screen-used Stormtrooper helmet. To the right is a scan of that same helmet, and right below that is a scan of a TIE Pilot helmet, which is just a little variation from your regular Stormtrooper. On the right is a very early sculpt of the helmet. This was in the initial design phase of A New Hope, I think in 1976, I believe. So this was all done by hand in clay and in resin, and they then used this as a mold in a vacuum forming process so that they could make all the copies they want, like 50, 100, whatever it was. So I don't know if any of you have actually seen one of these screen-used helmets in person, or maybe a copy of one, but I did. But you'd be pleasantly surprised and maybe even disappointed by how very unrefined they actually look compared to what you might remember them looking like in the films. You might, you spent your whole childhood looking at these and you have a certain image of what these things are. But seeing the actual prop, for me, in my case, it was quite disappointing. They actually look like they were put together rather quickly, or you could even say they were put together by a 5-year-old. A lot of stuff is very crooked, and they're very asymmetrical. They're very inconsistent from one helmet to the next. Like the top part will just have a different angle from one to the other. Certain details like the vents painted on the side, for example, it looks good from far, but up close, all that stuff was hand painted. And seeing it in your hands, you see all the rough brush strokes, and it's actually pretty nasty to look at. But for the time being, at the time for those first 3 movies, it was fine. They were used mainly as background characters. It's pretty rare you saw them up close. The emphasis was more on having a large quantity of them on screen, and not so much having them look good individually. So fast forward to today, our needs are a little different. We knew that, I'm still using the helmet as an example, we knew that creating this asset, it would be used on our main character, but also we knew that doing this for an in-game model, it would also be repurposed for cinematics, meaning many close-ups, and also it would be used in marketing. So we wanted to just use one model for all of that. We didn't want to have a high-res cinematic version and a more in-game low-res version for the game. So we just wanted to make sure we had a clean model that we could use for all of this that would hold up well for all of that. But in doing this, these subtle changes that we made, it was also very important that we didn't deviate from what these original designs were. And that's where the scan data really helped us out. So again, bottom right group of images, you got 3 Stormtrooper helmets lined up. Again, the first one on the left, it's the one you already saw. It's the scan. In the middle is the work in progress of our helmet in ZBrush. And to the right is the Rogue One version, which I used as a reference the whole time working on this. I had seen a talk by John Knoll. John Knoll is a VFX supervisor at ILM, worked on Rogue One. And they went through the same process as us, basically just making little tweaks, modifications on the helmet, just so that it holds up better by today's standards. Everything is in 4K today. At home, people have 80-inch screens and whatnot. So I just followed that same principle, and for our process, which is pretty simple. As an example, the top left corner, we had our scan as a base subtool, and then slowly just going in and selecting off areas that were usually meant to look like they were their own part in the original helmet, but because of all the inconsistencies of the cut lines and as you can see in the bottom scan, you have a cut line, but then it slowly fades into nothing. So what we wanted is to get rid of all that and really have a real breakup of all the parts. So like I said, select off an area, usually a part that's meant to be separated, duplicate it. We would then delete whatever we didn't need, and then using Dynamesh, just spend a little time refining it, polishing it. If it was crooked, just reapply symmetry, straighten everything out. And in the top right corner, that's just the whole collection of all the images that make up our final helmet in ZBrush. And my main tool for all this the whole time was Dynamesh. I didn't really do any really polygon modeling. It was strictly in Dynamesh. It was just much easier to go from scan to cleanup, and just having the ability to seamlessly like combine and add parts and blend parts together on the fly, which is very important for us because stuff changes every day. So Dynamesh just made things like a whole lot easier for us. So that's the final helmet in ZBrush. It's much sharper. You could see areas like the chin, which in the original one was just a soft, very subtle, implied detail. That stuff is now like really extracted. There were times where we had to invent certain parts of an asset, mainly because we just don't see it in the original films. In this case, it's the inside of Aiden's helmet, which in our case we see quite a lot of in our cutscenes. So this is a perfect example of how the artists on this project were able to contribute to the design of certain assets that in the end is actually considered authentic to Star Wars universe. So that's going back to what I spoke to you about the Lucasfilm story group. Everything now stays aligned. Like whatever happens in a video game, that has to be true for if it were in the movie or on TV, and so on and so forth. On the left is another example of photogrammetry. It's a full body scan of a TIE pilot. And on the right is the in-game, it's the ZBrush, final ZBrush model of Inferno Squad. So as you can see, we rarely are able to use this stuff as is. It's especially getting into reflective surfaces like armor or metallic parts. Those parts tend to be the most problematic most of the time. Just the software has a hard time reading what that stuff is, and you end up with lots of artifacts. But it's still amazing to use as a reference. We use them as a guide for positioning or scaling of parts. And switch. Yeah, we use them as a guide for positioning of parts. Like in this case, the armor on this guy is the same process that I explained for the helmet. It's just masking parts off of the scan and then polishing it off, maybe with H-polish. I use trim dynamics sometimes. So that's that for the hard surface parts. But then when you get into like the softer bits, like the gloves or jumpsuit, or even the smaller parts like the tiny rivets, the tiny buttons, or like the belt buckle, all that stuff isn't really, there's no use in trying to save that stuff off the scan. So we just redid all that stuff from scratch. But then we went back to the scan as a guide to make sure all that stuff was placed at the exact same spot. Again, that's just our way to make sure that our model stays as true to what these original designs were, because all this stuff in the end, before we start getting into an in-game version, all this stuff goes back to Lucasfilm for approval, and they look at all this stuff, which is very important. And this is a turntable of Aiden in ZBrush. Yeah. So there's a mix of stuff in there. There's like cleaned up scan data on that, and some simulated cloth. The gloves, I think, might have been taken off a scan and just cleaned up a little, because they were pretty clean, so we were able to save them. So we have another trailer? No.
Yeah, it's the messenger trailer.
Okay, yeah. It's a cutscene from our single-player campaign, and in it you'll see Aiden Versio, Garrick Versio, and another character called the Messenger, which Pio will then talk to you about what his process was on that character.
The Emperor is dead.
So what happens now?
We retaliate, Commander. The Empire will assault the very foundation of the rebels' pathetic belief in themselves. Tell me, Aiden, what is the source of their belief?
Hope.
Correct. This messenger's presence is a great honor, one I choose to share with my daughter.
Admiral Versio, Operation Cinder is to begin at once. Resistance, rebellion, defiance. These are concepts that cannot be allowed to persist. You are but one of many tools by which these ideas shall be burned away. Heed my messenger. He shall relay you to your target.
Operation Cinder is the last command of our Emperor, and the first step in securing our future. Inferno is crucial to its success.
What's our target?
You are not verified.
That information can wait. For now. Here are next assignments. They are unusual. But these are unusual times. Go, Commander. Do what you do best.
So yeah, that's the messenger. Basically, messenger, it's also called the Sentinel droid. Its main purpose is to deliver a message after the Palpatine's dead. So basically, all his costume is it's kind of a robot. It's a droid, and there's the Palpatine hologram in his helmet. This character was not shown in any movies. It was only in a comic book from Marvel called Shatter Empire. We have an example here. So we didn't add any props to work with or any photogrammetry. It was taken strictly from this comic book. We didn't do any concept art in-house for this character. I just mainly used those images. So as you can see, like there's a lot of drawing intention in those comic books. Like if you look at the one that is standing up, the head is very small, and I think this is to make it look more imposing. But if you look at other pictures, the head is like kind of the same size than a human head. So there's kind of some small interpretation, of course, that was to do with this character. So yeah, I started with the helmet because the helmet's kind of the most important part of a character. So I just wanted to show you a quick process of how I usually do my work. First of all, I always, of course, start in ZBrush just to block out my shapes. I find that ZBrush is very handy, like if you use Dynamesh to move things around, cut, slice, or anything. But for this guy, since it's like kind of very simple geometric shapes, I started straight away with the Z modeler, and I just did some very quick rough parts. And then, as you can see, the first one was my blockout. The second image is just a dynamic subdivisions version of this model. And then I just went ahead with those top one and just did a quick retopo of and blend those two parts together. And yeah, I use a lot the creasing. The creasing, I kind of changed my whole workflow of modeling because of the creasing. I find that there's really a lot of advantages compared to the old workflow I was using with the kind of the three edges that crease the geometry.
Supporting edges.
Yeah, the supporting edges. First of all, the creasing, you have a lot less topology to work with. If you move a point, all the crease follow this point. Instead, if you have like 3 edges, like you have a lot more geometry to work with. And also, you have kind of dynamic control of the look of the smoothing after you've done it. You can always change if you want it more smooth. So you can have a dynamic utility to work with. But the most important part is that the creasing kind of, you have a more equal area of polygons on your mesh when you subdivide. Because when you have 3 edges, all the subdivision polygons are going through those edges. But when you get the creasing, you can have a more even surface distribution across the subdivision levels. So if you want to do any alpha works or any surface detail, you're going to have a lot more resolution to work with. So yeah, that's with the helmet. Basically, I just use the creasing to have a very simple shape and very geometric simple shape. And after I just went on to work on the fabric. First of all, that was the first pass. That was like the raw simulation from Marvelous Designer. I kind of brought this simulation to about 50% because I start with the base mesh model, and there's some stuff about the proportion I didn't really like. So instead of trying to fight with the simulation, I brought the model to a good point, and then I start to edit all the rest inside ZBrush. So that's basically the raw simulation, but that's the version with the ZBrush. Basically, I redid all the bottom part with I remodeled all the bottom part, and yeah, of course, I added some secondary fold, some surface detail, and also I blended some parts together with the project all and ZProject brush. So yeah, and also when we submit mesh, when we submit picture for an approval to the client.
LUCASFILM.
Yeah, for LUCASFILM in this case. I really like to put the mesh in the best lighting scenario possible. I think first of all, it makes the approval a bit more easier because if you just send a picture of a viewport, the client might focus on something that it's not really relevant. But if you put the model in a very good lighting scenario, he's going to focus more on those parts. And another thing we did before sending it to the client is just to give it a very quick pose, just to give it a little bit the intention of the character. It gives a kind of a bit more personality to the character. And also we send it to Keyshot. We use a lot Keyshot for this project because it's very fast to just send your model. Like it takes basically a day, then you can just do some Photoshop on it instead of like taking your model, then doing the retopo, baking, UV and stuff. You send it to the client. You have some iteration to do, and then you have to come back and do all those iterations back again.
Yeah, basically, you want to make them see the model while you're still very much ahead.
Yeah, because
in the ZBrush phase before you start doing retopology and UVs and all that stuff.
And it kind of give a good idea of what the final model is going to look like after the whole process, but it only takes a day to do. So yeah, so we just brought it in Photoshop. Also, I did a quick test of the hologram. And then after we sent it to the client, he was very happy about it. Did some comment, we did some iteration, then we had to do all the baking and the texturing process. And so that's what the final model looks like in our game engine Frostbite, with all the baking and stuff. And then also I did some R&D on the hologram. So that's it about the messenger. So I'll also work a little bit on this droid. It's the droid that is an Eden Versio back.
Eden sidekick.
Yeah, it does a lot of things in the game. And I just want to show a little tricks that we use to kind of blend all the pieces together. When the model is completely done, we just bring the model inside the ZBrush and merge everything together with Dynamesh, all the pieces. And at that time, we didn't have the 4:8, so we did it like with the Dynamesh way we did before. And also, it was it's like a way of blending all the shapes together and having that nice little highlight in between the shapes. It kind of looks like it's kind of
To make it look like it's all been molded
Yes.
or cast
It's like if it's-
together. Because let's say this was all being done in the old way of subdivision modeling, blending all these cylinders onto like the other parts would take time, but this was all done very quickly. Stuff like the lens or the cylindrical parts, those were like very basic primitives. And all it took is bringing all that into Dynamesh and with clay
clay
polish?
Clay polish, yeah.
clay polish, which is kind of like a turbo smooth.
Yeah, so
We'll just smooth all that stuff out, and it looks.
it's kind of give a nice little final touch to
Yeah.
the model. Give that like a nice little highlight in between the pieces. And also, it's very important to do this when the model is completely done, because let's say you bring
destructive.
yeah,
It's
let's say you
destructive.
bring two pieces together, then you clay polish them together. It's gonna smooth a little bit the surface. But also with the clay polish, if you use there's a smoothing parameter you can play to not destroy too much of the hard surfaces. But yeah, if you bring two pieces together, you do a clay polish, and then you add another piece, and then you do another clay polish. The first one's gonna kind of have
Be more
double.
overly polished, overly smooth
Yeah,
compared
exactly.
to the other one, which will be much sharper. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so that's the final model inside our FROSTBITE engine, and yeah, as you can see, there's this little highlight on those shapes. So yeah, just as a final point, I just want to give a little shout out to the ZBrush Live crew. It's not relevant to the game, but I just want to give a little shout out to the ZBrush Live crew that do those live streams. First of all, that's here we have the helmet on the table that was done with by Thomas, who do those live stream. And also that's a work in progress that I did the modeling process on those live stream. Like I said, I do this just once a month, and it's very casual stream. Yeah, I work on personal stuff, and it's like mostly sci-fi stuff for the moment. So yeah, feel free. Like it's very like casual. People just can ask questions, can hang out, talk about mostly anything. So yeah, feel free to join and
Get your secrets.
yeah, hang out.
Yeah, get the tips.
Cool.
And switch.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. We're just going to switch over.
Switch. So you can take over.
If anyone's got any questions at this point as well, feel free to stick a hand up.
Yeah. At any time.
Let us know. Cool.
And
Hope
no
you can hear me
Star
okay.
Trek questions.
Yeah.
I do have one question coming from online, which was, what does it take to be a character artist? Which might be a little vague, but
Do you want to start? Or?
what would your
What
response to that
what
be?
does it take to be a
What
character?
would it take to be a character artist, this quality? Where would you start?
I would,
Maybe likenesses,
years
you know.
ago, I would say like school, like that's what I took as a route. But today, school is still important. But I'm talking about what school was for me, where I had to pay like $20,000, and but in that today it's more like you have so much access online with stuff like Noman, and just look at that stuff, or look at what you aspire to, like what are the best character artists doing, try to emulate, try to get some of those skills that can, push you forward.
Study your anatomy.
Study your anatomy,
Study
yeah.
construction and all that.
Basically, focus on something. Don't try to do everything, because that's pointless. You're just gonna slow yourself down quite a lot.
I'd say as well, if you've got a clear idea about the kind of work that you want to do, focus on it and don't give up on, you know what I mean, like stick with it.
Sleepless nights.
Yeah. focus on those core art skills as well. It's always like transferable. Don't get too hung up on like specific software or anything like that. You know, it's that core learning how to be critical of your own work as well. That's really important.
And maybe
use forums.
Maybe focus more on the art side than the technical side, I guess.
Yeah.
Like bring up your anatomy skills and then to really learn how to create like more nice art than just trying to understand what the software does.
Yeah, I mean there are things you can do like obviously just practicing but practice with a purpose. So you kind of like look critically at your work and figure out where it's falling down, or seek opinions and then focus on improving that area will help you get better quicker than just, you know, repeating the same, staying in your comfort zone, etc. Cool.
That's good advice. Thanks, guys.
No worries. Cool, yeah, so hi to everyone. Thanks for coming out today. Really appreciate it. I'm going to talk firstly a little bit about creating the heads for the campaign, then touch on a little bit of creature stuff, and then finish up with some cloth techniques at the end. So making the campaign for Battlefront 2, one of the most important aspects of that is the story itself. And to tell that story effectively, we had to get a convincing performance from our characters and nice facial animation, etc. That's a really important tool in telling that story. So to achieve the quality that we needed required quite a big collaborative effort between many people as well as departments at Motive, DICE, as well as enlisting the help from our friends at EA's The Capture Lab and 3 Lateral, who helped us out with the rig creation for all our heads. So yeah, from the first days on the project, that was my big focus and responsibility to make sure that from the art perspective that we were going to be able to deliver everything that we needed on time and to the right quality. Up on screen, we got the example of 2 of the characters that you saw in that previous cutscene that we showed. On the left, you've got Aiden, played by Janina Gavankar, and on the right is Garrick, played by Anthony Scordi. Oh, thanks. So, yeah, for the main characters in the game, we cast the exact actors that we wanted for that role and created them as digital doubles. The one big advantage of doing it that way is that all the like the voice, the facial performance, the model, and all the expressions are going to be nicely in sync, and we can analyze and match that stuff well. We scan the heads totally neutral, like with clean faces, and then we do like a digital makeup pass and just make like small edits, but not really changing the look of the characters too much. In the game as well, we actually have a mixture of scanned heads as well as sculpted heads, which are created entirely from scratch, from sculpts. So we had to make sure that those characters would look right on screen alongside each other and have a similar level of quality and fidelity to them, which is a big challenge. So today I haven't got any of the sculpted stuff that I can show today, but the same level of detail and the whole process was the same, so I'm going to demo on these scanned assets. Cool. Oh yeah, I can do it, thanks. Oh, cool. So yeah, what you're looking at here is just some examples of the photographs from the scan session, which was performed by the Capture Lab. We scanned, of course, like the neutral state of the head, as well as a full range of facts-based expressions. So for anyone unfamiliar with that, it stands for Facial Action Coding System. And essentially what it is a way of just analyzing how the face is moving and breaking that down into units that you can measure, which kind of roughly correspond to major muscle groups on the face, or major movements that you can make, and and it's it's a very common system that you'll see in rigs for VFX and games, etc. There's different ways of rigging, but it's an important part of it. So yeah, really big thanks to the Capture Lab, who helped us out tremendously on this and gave us some like amazing data to work with. Yeah, so it was great in it. And at this stage, for the scanned heads, this would be passed directly to 3 Lateral, who would then build process that data to meshes and build our the rigs from that. Oh, thanks. Yeah, so what we're looking at here is an example of the type of scene that we have once we get it back in ZBrush. So it's all cleaned up, and the way we have it set up is we always have our in-engine topology as our base subdivision level inside of ZBrush with our final UVs and all that kind of stuff. It's all common. All the heads have like the same topology, same UV setup. It's like really important and helpful process. So yeah, whether the head is sculpted or scanned, it's all set up in exactly the same way. You've got in the layer stack, you can see that I'm scrolling through. You've got all the key expressions we need for the rig and for wrinkle maps and things like that. The way it's organized is we have a main layer for each expression, and that just contains shape changes on the actual base topology. And then you can set up subsequent layers below that for smaller edits. So we're talking things like the wrinkles and pore level detail. You can see we're getting some like amazing stuff back from the scan. We've got like Anthony's got amazing expressive face. So yeah, we'd have to do the same sort of level of detail in either type of head. But for a scanned head, to create those expressions, you'd essentially take that base mesh, match it to the shape of the scanned processed head, and then you can reproject that detail down. Whereas for a sculpted head, you just do it directly inside of ZBrush, sculpt it to the expression that you want, try and match it up that way, and then you'd still add those extra layers, do it in a non-destructive manner where you're not, so you can just override and change how the pores are looking. So with the 3 lateral rigs, they're really complicated, and they give us a great deal of control. So they did a really nice job with that. The way that they are set up, they're mainly bone driven, but then we also have a lot of corrective blend shapes running on top of that. And you can kind of think of the corrective blend shapes as filling in the resolution and complexity that you can't achieve from the bones alone. Cool. So, and then on top of that, we have the normal maps, and we have multiple blending normal maps, so that as the expression dials in, it also changes that small scale detail. And you can think of the normal maps as filling in the resolution that the mesh doesn't have. Cool. Yeah. So here's an example. You've got on the left-hand side is like the neutral normal map, sorry, and on the right-hand side, that's like one of the wrinkle maps in that area. We've also got blend-in diffuse maps. So these are all. This is an example of the same area companion map. So what you have in here, what you want to get in these maps is any of those appearance changes that occur when the expression comes in. So that comes from blood flow, thickness. The thickness of the skin changing is through compression, etc. It's also good to have like a small amount of small scale lighting information in those maps for real-time stuff. It's great getting that from a scan. You're getting all that stuff for free. It's nicely in sync with the model. But when you're doing a sculpted head, we would actually synthesize as much of these effects as we could, so that it's all kind of linked and brought in from the sculpt. And then we could go in and make some hand edits on top of that and direct it as we saw fit. So, yeah, lots of complexity, all this cool stuff, but when you've got tons of heads to make and you want to make changes, it can become quite cumbersome to set all this stuff up. So I needed to establish a kind of crude pipeline just to help create these maps and things as we were making changes. And the first step in that process was to use ZScript. So PO helped me out here. I'd never used the ZScript before. I was kind of scared by it. But he showed me how to use it and helped write an expression to go through that layer stack. And because we have all the heads set up in the same format with the same naming convention, you can search through that and export out low-res and high-res versions of each expression, as well as displacement maps, which we would use for the texturing process. And then from that, I would wrote a bit of Python script to just bake out normal maps. That's like stuff that we needed specifically for Frostbite. And then in the final step, just had another like nuke script to composite, because you're baking out maps from each key expression, but then we composite those into the final maps that we're going to run in the engine. So something like that is a bit of an investment of time for the first head. It's like rather than doing it just manually yourself. But for all subsequent heads, it just meant that you could make those changes and like run the scripts and you're good to go. And for something like this, it's like ZScript is essential for doing anything like this. So if you ever find yourself, doing something really repetitive and you realize like you might be able to make some time savings there, it's there if you need it to take advantage of. Cool, yeah, so I'll play this video. This is like to show you the end result inside of Frostbite. So yeah, this is just running in real time in the viewport. So it's we've got the heads there, and it's running like a range of motion animation, which we can put on the characters to validate how the face is moving. And I'd say like one of the kind of quirks of doing facial stuff is that it's very hard to actually validate the expressions or work that you're doing at an early stage. Like you can show it to people, but until you see it kind of all come together and start to move, you can't really spot the problems and like how is it going to actually work right. So that's why having that pipeline, quick way to get your stuff in is useful, because you can see something that you want to change, just go straight back to ZBrush, do your edits there, and then get it quickly back into Engine, and you're not having to do any like hacks or edits like out of that. One of the really cool features that we got in for this, which I think is super important, is that the normals of the mesh are updating per frame. That's really super important to get this with a mesh like head meshes like this, where it's quite geometry heavy, to get that shading looking correct. And it's not a standard implementation for like real-time skinning. You normally would optimize, do it in a slightly different way. We also got some really nice SSS and translucency available inside of Frostbite, which was really nice to use for the first time on this project. So I really hope you're going to like the result when you play the final game. If you enjoy it, just remember that it was a big collaborative effort, and if you don't like it, just please don't blame it all on me, okay? So moving on. So next up, yeah, one of the most fun things for me on this game was getting to do this this creature, and it's like an original design for the game, and it's actually a bit of a Summit exclusive because it's not been seen by the public, but we got permission to show it here for the first time today. So when you're doing something original for the project.
Wait. They're all taking pictures with their cell phone.
Oh, no. It's all fine. It's fine.
It's fine.
I hope.
It's fine.
Yeah, so when you were doing something original, original designs, that's where it was super cool to have Lucasfilm like working really closely with us, and they would, their knowledge and understanding of what Star Wars is just incredible. And they would guide us and make sure that we were going to create something that feels authentic within the Star Wars universe. And we would also could work with them and ensure that we were going to make something that would work for the game as well and serve the needs of the gameplay, etc. So yeah, here's the original concept that I was working with. This was painted by one of our concept artists, Jin. At this stage, the design is pretty much like locked down. It's already been through that back and forth process where we're, working out, making quick changes to the design. And then it's my job now to take that and translate it into a final, working textured model and all that. You can see that there's some areas like that aren't drawn aren't like designed on the model, so I'll have to resolve some of that stuff along the way. When I was approaching this, like the first step for me would be to kind of study the concept and just get a real clear idea in my own mind about what it was and what are those materials like, how hard is it, how soft is it, what are the details, and I think that's really useful with sculpting to so that you go in with a clear intention, and even just having a feel for that material as you're sculpting it. Otherwise, you can kind of end up with a bit of a vague result if you haven't really resolved that before starting. I'll also start to kind of break down the design. How am I going to build how's the final model going to be in different parts? How's it going to move? How can I optimize things? So, for instance, say like the legs on the creature. I know that I can just sculpt one of those and duplicate it around, make some efficiency savings. There's areas of the model that I can safely mirror. Cool. So yeah, next up, always collect as much like reference material. You can see that from the design of the creature that it's got some elements that are clearly from real world animals. So I think that's a good part of the design, because people understand those creatures and they're going to bring some preconceptions and understand what it is quickly. But when I'm looking for reference, I don't necessarily look for something that's directly related to what I'm making. I'm just looking for perhaps nice details or textures and patterns and things that I can use. It's also useful for resolving those parts of the anatomy that I was talking about that aren't designed in the concept already. So on the lobster in the bottom right-hand corner, I was looking at that for how the leg's going to attach to the creature. So yeah, jumping into ZBrush. Starting out with taking a sphere, using the Dynamesh workflow, just start pulling things around like clay, not being too precious about what I'm doing. Yeah, at this stage it's trying to resolve that 2D design into a 3D form, but most importantly not losing the gesture of the design and that graphical design of it. You know what I mean? So I think it's good to work fast, so you don't get too bogged down in the details. I'll even use the transparent UI feature inside of ZBrush. You can just put the concept in the background, make the whole UI 50% opaque, and you can trace over elements to get the proportions matching nicely. Yeah, so at this stage, the sculpt is a long way from being finished, but functionally, everything is there, right? So it's really cool I would just get this straight into game before I'm doing any more further work on it. And I'll use the decimation master to just make a real fast, optimized mesh, which I can then export out, put some rough UVs on it, put some very basic textures, and just pass that to the rigging team. And we can get it into game and start actually seeing it in gameplay and iterating. I'd even as well, if possible, kind of sit on it for a bit, leave it, just put it to the side for a few weeks if I can start something else, because you've kind of, at this point, you've unlocked the designers, you've unlocked the animation team to start doing their work, and you also can save yourself some headaches because there might be potential problems or things that could be improved, and it will all come out through that process while it's still super easy to make edits to the model at this stage. It's going to be really quick to change it. Also, just a quick shout out to id Software from last year's summit. We all came and did their creature workshop, which was massive inspiration seeing their work. And I'm actually using one of their matcap materials on this video from a while back. So yeah, so when I'm totally confident that those primary shapes are working and I'm happy to move forward with it, I'll just Z-remesh that model, give myself a nice clean slate to work from, and I know I'm going to be able to detail on that well. then start to refine it a little bit from there, start to sculpt in secondary forms. And then finally, for the fine details and smaller details on this creature, I just created a whole bunch of these like custom brushes. And it's super quick to just grab a plane. I know I'm going to want to put these, there's these kind of blobby chromophore things. So you can just sculpt it once, and then do use the MZG or the dot grabber thing to get the Z depth map for that, and then make a bunch of custom brushes, and then it's really quick to do those details. I was doing this a little while back in the pre-ZBrush R8 dark ages, so obviously it's just depth map. But if I was doing it today, I'd definitely take advantage of that cool vector displacement stuff. Give that a try. So the other thing is you hear it a lot. Everybody talks about layers, how important it is, but it's people talk about it because it's really useful. So yeah, I always keep those details separated out into layers, so I can make changes to the detail, or I can make changes to the big forms without it destroying one or the other. Also, when I was talking about doing the Z remesh, I like to keep that quite low res and quite vague, not too specific to the shape. So in this example, on the left is how I originally sculpted the tail, but when the shell of the creature kind of opens up, it just felt really separate and not unnatural. So I had to come back and rework it to get a more organic blend on the version on the right-hand side. But because that topology is not too specific to how I'd sculpted it, it's just really easy to rework and change that. So yeah, and then here's a little just turntable of the finished model. The only other thing to mention is I used a little bit of fiber mesh for the tail and around the gills kind of thing. So yeah, look out for it in the game. It's going to popping up in the game. You can see the final result and textured results. Cool. Yeah, so for this is the final section. I'll just talk about some cloth techniques. Jeez. So I haven't got any of the Star Wars assets. Strong, bad stuff. Yeah, I haven't got any of my Star Wars stuff that I can. I'll show today. So I just made this this asset for the sake of the summit, just to demo it all. And but it's the same techniques that I use every day on the project. It was also the first time that I'd ever tried out using live booleans, and I'm really sold on that workflow now. So I'm going to start doing all my hard surface stuff directly inside of ZBrush now. It's the final piece of the puzzle for me. And just to warn you guys, next section is mostly about polygroups. So I've saved the best stuff till last. It's going to be pretty. It's going to be a wild ride. Yeah, it really is. So. So for a long time, when you're working with, when I'm working with simulated cloth meshes and then bringing them into ZBrush, I could never really find a good workflow that kind of satisfied everything that I wanted from that mesh, which was to have basically a good low-res base topology with relaxed UVs, relaxed topology, as well as the original UVs from the pattern pieces still intact, because that's very good for doing fabric detail that matches, how it would be on the real fabrics. And then also still having some subdivision levels so I can capture that high res or smoother drapery from a high res simulation. So came up with this kind of pretty convoluted workflow involving exporting out two versions of the simulation, one high res and then one lower res quadded, but with the same UVs. And then I would do some stuff where I'd then subdivide that low res mesh, and then transfer vertex positions from the high res version, but importantly, transferring it in UV space rather than in world space. The reason for that is that when you have, if it's a very complicated garment or you have something like a scarf that's overlapping itself or intersecting, you know, you might get projection errors if you're doing it in world space. Whereas with projecting by UV space, it's going to work every time, and it's like really, it's much more robust workflow. But luckily, I put all of that into like a small tool, small like Python script for Maya. Which if it's something that might be useful to you, you can just go to my website on that link there and just download it for free, give it a try. But enough of that, we're going to get back to ZBrush. So this is what it looks like when I'm bringing it in. I use like GoZ to just import my model straight in. And because I set up like selection sets inside of Maya, it's already got some polygroups assigned for the inside, the outside, and the edges of the fabric. I also always like to keep my sort of pattern pieces as separate meshes rather than, you know, like you could fuse them together potentially. But then I like the way that when you smooth it, you get a kind of natural seam where the pieces meet. As well as you can use in the polygroups menu, there's like the group, I think it's like auto groups, and it kind of groups by polygon continuity. So I can kind of switch to having polygroups per piece and really quickly mask out different areas, do what I need to do, sculpting it. You always got to like rework some drapery, add some damage, whatever you need. So you can see that the model, it already had that smoother high res. It's already like a more high res mesh. But because of how the script has subdivided the model, you can reconstruct the subdivision levels. One thing that I found out recently is I've ticked the smooth UV, it's like SUV button next to divide, and that actually has an effect when you're dividing a model as well as when you're reconstructing the subdivision levels. So because I've got like relaxed out smooth UVs, it will maintain that when you reconstruct the subdivision levels instead of kind of linearizing them. So yeah, it can be useful sometimes to have that lower subdivision level available for making like broader edits to the model, as well as it makes things perform a little bit better when you're working on like a really heavy scene with lots of pieces. So, final slide. So, as I mentioned, yeah, I've still got those original pattern UVs still intact on the model, because I like to quite often apply tiling fabric detail as displacement, and because the UVs are relaxed on it and the topology is already relaxed, I can use the smooth brush and work really heavily with the model without distorting that pattern. Like I've just got some noise on there for now. But if you might have encountered issues working with like triangulated meshes and stuff like that, they can give you problems. And then when I finish the character inside of ZBrush, like my final step is I'll always like apply my material IDs as polypaint directly to the model. So because I've got the sections using the polygroups, I can just like quickly mask out areas, flood fill it with colors from the system palette. Got nice like ID colors to use. And this mask is like, it's clearly some sort of like fabric-y thermal mask. But say for whatever reason you wanted to make it a leather mask, yeah, you might want to have like kind of like the leather grain, like a different ID for that leather grain on the outside, and then another ID for the suede kind of side of the leather on the other side, and also on the edges of the fabric. And I had those polygroups set up when I brought the model in, but I overwrote them. But because I've basically spaced the UVs out into different UDIMs, you can use that feature in ZBrush, like the UV groups, to basically toggle back to the old polygroup setup. And then I can just flood fill those like different IDs on the edges or the inside of the model. And you got yourself a groupy leather mask that's good to go for whatever reason you might need for that. Cool. And that's it. That's what we've got today. Thanks for watching.
Before these guys go away, anybody in the audience got any questions before we usher them into the interview? There we go. Let's start with you. I can see you. What's your question? Oh, sorry.
No episode 8 question.
Just shout it at me.
You mentioned using Keyshot for doing quick renders, but what do you use to render things out other than like a prop render?
That's we use Keyshot for our pipeline for approvals and whatnot. I guess you mean like for marketing, or it's another department we wouldn't be able to say. Don't really know.
Yeah, we use there's a lot of image are done in, right in our engine, because our engine have some feature that you can render like 16K or 8K images, which is easier because since we do all those baking and stuff, we like if we did give the mesh to like a company, they won't necessarily have the ZBrush and all the high-res, but our engine is powerful enough to put out those very high-res images. So we use our engine for some of the marketing images.
Yeah, it's a mix.
Yeah, you've done all that work on the textures, etc., on the in-game asset. So it would be quite difficult to like push that back through to the high-res. But yeah, you could take those textures and stuff and set up some shaders to get a nice like high res render. If you
It's like
go to that one. That one.
This one.
That one. That one or that one.
Yeah, but those both
same thing.
That's the one Arnold did.
That's
like the
that's
image.
from the engine.
The image on the left here was done in Frosted, so that's a snapshot that was done in Frosted.
Yeah, we can do things inside of Frostbite to kind of add fidelity that you wouldn't necessarily get inside of the game, but we can ramp up settings like crazy if we're just going to do a still image.
The image on the right is Keyshot render of the ZBrush model. That's like we said, we do that so that we don't wait till too far along when we start doing a low res. That's still just subtools out of ZBrush that we brought into Keyshot and did the render passes and did a little compositing in Photoshop, and that's more than enough to send out. And image on the left, that's the actual ZBrush model that, again, they did some renders, and that's being used on one of our game covers for, I think, like the Trooper Elite Edition. So it's really, we mix and match techniques and different renders, and like he said, like the other image he showed you, that was a render of the 3 of them, but that was in-game models. But then something like this, we're using the ZBrush stuff to make the renders, and you could tell that you don't really see much of a difference. That's how our low-res versions are actually pretty well refined and.
Thanks, guys. We got one more. We have time for one more question. This guy right here.
Yeah, hi. I just got 2 quick questions. The first one is that Marvelous Designer low poly that was quadded. Is that your in-game res, or do you just take that and use it?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
I have a hard time.
Marvelous Designer, the low res that you exported that was quadded. Is that what you just take into the game? You don't have to do any more work. It's
Oh, for the game? No. So, no, that would just be for the sake of the work inside of ZBrush.
Okay.
For the in-game version, we would it would be totally new topology, like created for the in-game model. But we are using tiling detail maps on the clothing. So that's a good tip if you're working in games and you're using that. Like, you kind of want your UV layout for the in-game model to be pretty much the same as your pattern pieces, like what you would be your block pattern for the fabric if you cut up the jeans or whatever and laid them out, because then kind of, if the fabric has a kind of visual clear like direction to it, it's going to flow properly over the folds of the clothing rather than looking like a flap, like projected on. So.
Like a scarf would be a good example.
Yeah.
If you have a low-res scarf and you just UV the scarf as is, instead of using the actual UVs of what that flat piece of fabric is, and then you tile a certain pattern to it. The real like marvelous. I guess we're saying marvelous now.
Secrets out.
ZBrush Summit. If you use the real UVs from that, you'll get the pattern really flowing in all the nooks and crannies. Whereas if you do the UVs from scratch using what you have as your low res, it'll look like the pattern has just been pasted over. So, you know, if you have like a fold going over like this, the pattern will just be going over, as opposed to the other way where the pattern will really look like it's going into all the little crevices.
Like if you pull the cloth, it's gonna look like the cloth is pulled.
Yeah, same thing with detail maps. For detail maps, the same thing. Just it'll flow like as if it's really cut out of that piece of fabric.
Yeah, and also you'll want to like create geometry borders along as much as possible along the seams of the garment, so you can actually split the UVs in those areas, and then you get like that natural break in the pattern of the detail map, and that kind of is more realistic to the cloth, and it kind of makes it pop and pops that detail out better as well.
And also another thing with having a low res inside your eye resolution sculpt is that if you have a low res, it's really easier to make edits than if you have like a super dense mesh, especially if you want to pose your character or anything. If you want to pose a character with 2 million polygons, it's going to be very hard and looking a bit skunk, like a bit weird. But if you have your low res, it's going to be a lot more easier to make some edits.
Okay, just also, what was the reason you used the system palette to choose a different color?
It's, well, not super exciting, but no, it's just, it's like in the system palette, all the colors are spaced out to their maximum in terms of like color range, you know what I mean? So obviously like the 3 RGB are like the furthest apart in the spectrum, and then, but the system palette is like broken down at like even intervals. So if you're making like an ID mask, those, you know, those colors are going to be as far apart in color space as possible, so you won't get so much you know, like feathering between them. I hope that's cool. Yeah.
All right, another big round of applause for these guys.
Thank you.